Hi folks, this is Angela from Fabricworks Studio again. Welcome to this podcast session. In this session, I'd like to talk to you about some of the guidelines that I use to streamline fabric in my studio. As a fabric artist and a quilt maker, as you might imagine, I have a pretty extensive fabric stash, as do many people do who work with fabric. And I think this is the same as in really any field. If you're a photographer, you have a lot of photography equipment. If you're an illustrator, you have a lot of drawing equipment. And so I think that hopefully these guidelines can kind of give you an impetus to developing your own guidelines, just to control some of the much needed equipment that we use all the time, equipment and materials that we use all the time in our studios. So I just wanted to run through some of the guidelines that I've developed over the years that really have come to help me in my own studio. And so one of the things that I do with fabric, and I make my own fabric too, let me just preface that. So I buy fabric that I need, and then I also paint and dye fabric and and then I also do digital. I do digital surface designs too. So, I have a lot of sources, where I can get fabric from. But one of my number one rules in dealing with it is that I buy or make fabric only for projects. Okay, at the beginning of my studio, I really started, going to the stores every week. I would hang around in the fabric stores, and I was that person who was hanging out in the local fabric store and watching for sales and clearance. And I would be the person who was, buying the fabric really just because I loved it. If it was a color that I liked or a pattern that I wanted. I didn't really have a project for it or anything, but I would just, I would just want it so badly in my stash. And so I did a lot of that, the first couple of years of my studio. And I really amassed this huge, fabric stash that was so hard to organize. Even when I had projects, it was a little difficult to find fabrics that I needed. And so now what I do is I plan out my projects for the year. And I actually produce a collection, which is another thing that really helps me. It really helps me to focus. So I produce every year a collection of quilts and tapestries and smaller items, that are kind of themed around a couple of things, a couple of concepts. And so I can kind of plan out my projects, and then I know pretty much ahead of time what type of fabric I'm going to be looking for, and what colors, and what kinds of textures or patterns that I want to look for. So that is something that really, really helps me. And then, like I said, I only endeavor to make batches that I know that I'm going to need. And then I also go out, when I'm buying fabric, I go out with a list. And sometimes I'll have sketches with me, and I'll have, pages, mood boards with me, and I know exactly what I'm looking for. So I only put in the stash what I need at that time. The other thing that really has helped me in the studio is to separate my fabrics from the actual working studio. So, for example, I created a fabric closet that is separate from my studio space. It's separate from the place that I work. So my studio workspace is one that's very, very open. It doesn't have a lot of stashes around. The equipment, if I have tools and things that are in there, they are hidden and I kind of pull them out when I need them. But it just creates a very tranquil space for me, and I really love that. I really love that. And so my fabric is in a closet in the hallway down from the studio. It's a really nice double-sized closet, and it's actually quite beautiful though. I put some shelving in there, and I have these uniform baskets, so it looks really nice and organized in there. I purchased these baskets from, I think it was Home Depot, or it may have been Home Depot or Walmart, and they are these Sterilite, if you know the company Sterilite baskets, and they have holes in them so the fabric can breathe, and there's no top on them, so there's nothing that I didn't want to stack anything on top of them. Okay, so I have the shelving in there from floor to ceiling, and I think it's about 5, maybe 6 levels of shelving in there. And then I have about 9 or 10 baskets, and the same size, same look, so it makes the closet look very, very neat. And it's a beautiful space. I mean, I kind of open the doors, and I have the fabric separated by, not so much by individual colors, but by color groups. And so I have basically 3 color groups in there. So I store my, what I call the warm colors, which are all the earthy reds and oranges, and then some of the browns, and then I store cool colors, and these are all of my blues and all of my greens, and then I store the third color group is my black, whites, and grays. And so that system has worked really, really well for me, and I can just kind of take these baskets out as I need them. That's one of the other things that I like, is they're small enough to kind of store yardage or fat quarters or what have you, but I can also pick up the entire basket and then bring it into the studio space if I need to. And that's the other thing. I organize also by size. So for example, within the basket, I like to put the yardage, like I'll store 3 different sizes. Sometimes I'll have yardage of fabric, anything that's over a yard. It gets kind of folded down in such a way to fit the width of the basket. And then I may have some fat quarters, and then I also have remnants. So my remnants, those come from, maybe they're just pieces that are left over from quilts that are made and tapestries, but you still want to keep them, And so I do have various scrap projects that I do, which my mosaics are one example of that. I do a lot of mosaics, and I can certainly use those remnants for the mosaics. And so I store those 3 sizes in that closet, and so it makes everything just really nice and neat. But there's a definite system of how the fabrics are organized in that closet, and they're organized in not so much of a very restrictive way. So for example, in one of the baskets, if I have my cool colors in there, it's not like all the blues and then all the greens. I would just have the blues and greens just in the same basket, so if I pick up the basket, I mean, they're mixed up within there, but as long as I have the yardage fabrics in the back, the remnants in the front, and sometimes I'll put the remnants in a Ziploc bag if they're really too small. And then if I just know that everything in that basket is blue, some kind of shade of a cool color, then I'm good to go. And that's enough for me. And then, so the next guideline I would say that I use is, this process of like, when you've gone through your yardage, you've gone through, a lot of times you'll end up with a lot of remnants. because you're kind of making your project, you're going along, and you find that in some of the baskets you may just have mostly remnants there. And so what I tend to do there is I start donating the fabric out. Okay, and I never really considered this as an option before. I know that I've donated quilts before, and I've donated batting and things like that, but I've never really considered donating fabric. And so one day, I was kind of cleaning out my closet. It was towards the end of the year too, when I really kind of do my inventory and see, after the collection is made, what fabrics do I want to keep and what things have been kind of, laying around. And I had the idea to contact a local guild in my area. And I'm in Charlotte, North Carolina. We have the Charlotte Quilters Guild, but we have some other smaller guilds, throughout North Carolina. And many of the guilds have groups within them, that where it's a couple of ladies who will make quilts and then donate them to the local hospital, or send them out to soldiers or something like that. And they're always looking for material, whether it's batting or backing material or actual quilt kits. But I had the idea to just, sew the scraps together and then just make it this, huge mosaic quilt top. And then I wrote a really nice letter to one of these guilds, and I said, I just explained to them what my situation was, that, I was a local fabric artist. I run a studio. I have a collection every year, and I put this collection out, and I have this fabric left, and I've made this quilt top out of it, and would they be so kind as to accept this as a donation? And it worked. They took the quilt top. They were happy to take it, and they said, hey, if you have any more, we'll put the materials to it. You don't have to do anything. If you just donate the top, we'll square it off. We'll do everything. And the lady was really so nice, to me, to say, hey, you don't even, if you have enough scraps, if you just organize them by color for us, we'll do it, because we actually have workshops where people come in and they sew all day to make these pieces. So she said, hey, if you have remnants and stuff like that, you can just send that to us too. But it's up to you. So I actually ended up sending out a couple of those letters, and there are, let me see, I don't know, I would say about 3 or 4 guilds that actually have agreed to take in the fabric that I have left over. So, and I never thought of doing that. And I would certainly encourage you to try it, to write a sincere letter, explain what the situation is. They may want you to, sew the top and add batting to it or whatever, but send it as a kit. Many of the guilds will take them as kits where you have to buy the backing, buy the batting, and then sew your fabric, and then just send it to them, and then they'll sew it. For me, I would rather not sew it on my own sewing machine, because I don't want to burn my sewing machine out, sewing the bed quilts and things. And so that's been a very good way of me, streamlining the fabric in my studio. And so, I just wanted to share with you some ways that I use. I think the first one is really key, is to move away from buying fabric because it's pretty. Okay, and go more towards project-based materials. Okay, so you're buying it for a particular project in mind. I also recommend that you work per year. I mean, when I switched to kind of a yearly schedule and working by a collection, so every year I produce about 6 quilts, about 6 tapestries, and then my fabric art, which are my smaller pieces that get framed up, they kind of roll out from the larger projects, just depending on, what I want to put in the store or what have you. So, but having that kind of definite project schedule in mind has really, really helped elevate my studio and what I'm doing in the studio. And then the way that you're organizing it, I think, is important also. And consider having it out of the studio. If you're somebody like me, I'm so completely inspired by fabric, and so when I see it, it just calls to me all the time, and it's like, oh my god. I have to get away from it. I have to get away from it while I'm working on projects. I have to get away from the rest of the fabric, that's kind of sitting there and inspiring me to do other things with it. So, it's one project at a time. And then the way that you're organizing it, I wholeheartedly recommend using baskets. I've used the wire basket, it's the wire basket things with the shelving. I've used that before. I've used bookcases before. I've used all kinds of things before. And I really have settled on just, very simple, uniform looking baskets in my closet. Works really, really well. The other nice thing about the baskets is that once the fabric, if you find that your fabric fills up in the baskets, well, that tells you, guess what, that it's time to donate. So I think it's a really good system, and I have a couple of these guidelines I think have really helped to streamline fabric in my studio. So thank you so much for listening to the podcast, and I will talk to you soon. This is Angela from Fabricworks Studio. You can visit my website at www.fabricworksstudio.com, and feel free also to check out my blog, which is at Trending in Surface Design. It's www.trendinginsurfacedesign.com. Bye for now.